In Brisbane, 6 different women stood before the courts, each case unfolding across suburbs from Alexandra Hills to Capalaba, raising chilling questions about rage, mercy, addiction, and responsibility. A wife accused of ending her terminally ill husband's life. A daughter whose 000 call masked a staged murder. A domestic argument that turned fatal in seconds. A brutal stabbing claimed as provocation. A charity founder exposed as a drug supplier. And a criminal lawyer who became a trafficker, all under Queensland law. 6 cases, 1 city. Let's break down how ordinary lives turned into headline trials.
If you want more deep dives like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to this channel. First offender. On a quiet December morning in 2023, the stillness of Alexandra Hills in southeast Queensland was broken by a death that would later ripple through a family and a courtroom. David Mobbs was 56 years old. He was a husband, a father figure, and a man battling an aggressive, degenerative illness, motor neurone disease. By early December, the disease had taken nearly everything from him. He was bedridden, could no longer speak. Communication came through grunts, blinks, and a signing board slowly. For 20 years, Kylie Trustwell Mobbs had been by his side. Her sons called him Dad. Their life together had stretched across 2 decades, birthdays, routines, and ordinary days. But on December 5th, 2023, the family met with the palliative care team. According to Crown Prosecutor Stephanie Gallagher, during that meeting, there was an indication that David wished to continue on for at least a further week before considering any end-of-life medication. But what happened after that meeting would later become the center of a murder charge. Prosecutors allege that following the discussion, Kylie began administering a cocktail of medication to her husband. Drugs, they say, were not consistent with Queensland's voluntary assisted dying regime. In a police interview, it is alleged she admitted to giving the medication over several hours, saying she did so in accordance with David's wishes. The defense does not deny the act. The question is whether it was murder or mercy. That evening carried emotional weight long before midnight. One of David's stepsons, Riley Relger, told the court that his father had indicated on more than one occasion that he was tired, that he wanted to be done. When asked directly whether he understood that to mean his father wanted to die and be free from the disease, Riley agreed. And then came what the family described as a breaking point. Later on December 5th, David lost control of his bowels. For many people, it might be a medical complication. For David, according to testimony, it was something more. Riley described it as a trigger. He told the court his father had made Kylie promise that if he ever reached that point, that level of incontinence, he did not want to continue fighting. In court, defense barrister Ruth O'Gorman asked Riley directly, did he have a clear memory of his father asking his mother to promise that if he reached that state, he wanted his life to be finished? Riley said yes. That night, around 11 p.m., Riley left the house briefly to get food. He was gone less than half an hour, and when he returned, he told the court, his mother was waiting for him. She told him she had given his father a cocktail. Riley walked over to David. He asked him directly, is this what you want, if you want to die? He testified that his father blinked twice, which meant yes. In court, Ms. O'Gorman pressed him. Did you have any doubt? Were you 100% sure he was saying yes? Yes, he replied. Riley said he then asked his father if he wanted him to call his brother, Jaden. David said no. Using the letterboard, Riley said his father spelled out that Jaden would most likely try to stop it. But Jaden tells a more complicated story. Earlier that same day, Jaden had encouraged his father to give it another week before discussing starting palliative care. He had witnessed the incontinence incident. He saw his father break down in tears. According to Jaden, David told him, if you really can't deal with it, I'm a big boy now. I can look after myself and look after my brother and my mum. Jaden said he told his father he would see him tomorrow. He was not called back that night. By around 5 a.m. on December 6th, David Mobbs was dead. In court, Jaden said he wasn't contacted before his father passed.
His voice carried the weight of hindsight when he told the magistrate, "If someone had just called me, I probably wouldn't be in this courtroom today." When asked whether the events of that night would have unfolded differently if he had been there, he paused. "Most likely," he said. When asked if his father still could have been given the medication, then he added something that cut through the legal complexity. "I'm happy he went as peacefully as he did." More than a year after David's death, in early 2025, Kylie Truswell-Mobbs was arrested and charged with murder. The Brisbane Magistrates Court, witnesses recounted those final hours, the blinks, the grunts, the letterboard spelling out intentions. After hearing the evidence, the magistrate ruled that there was sufficient material to commit Kylie to stand trial in the Supreme Court of Queensland. When asked if she wished to say anything, her barrister responded on her instructions, "No." Now this case moves to a higher court, where the central question remains unresolved. Was this an unlawful killing? Or was it a desperate act, carried out in the shadow of unbearable suffering? A wife honoring what she believed were her husband's final wishes.
Second offender. It was just after 7 a.m. On the line was 22-year-old Simona Zafirovska. Her voice trembled as she told the operator that intruders had broken into her home. She said her mother had been attacked. The scene she described was terrifying, strangers inside the house. But years later, a Supreme Court jury would decide that call was nothing more than an elaborate lie. Back in 2016, police arrived at the Zafirovska family home to find 54-year-old Radika Zafirovska dead in her bed. She had been bludgeoned to death. The injuries were catastrophic, severe blunt force trauma, multiple fractures to her face and skull. Justice Anne Lyons would later describe the violence in chillingly simple words. Radika was horribly, horribly injured. Prosecutors alleged she had been attacked as she slept, struck repeatedly with a piece of artificial timber, a synthetic plank later found hidden in her daughter's bedroom. From the beginning, Simona denied responsibility. She insisted intruders had entered the property, attacked her mother, and fled. In the immediate aftermath, parts of the house appeared ransacked. The lounge room and kitchen were in disarray, but there were problems with that story. There were no signs of forced entry. The home was secured behind high fences. For intruders to enter, they would have needed to scale those fences, so the prosecutors described the scenario as far-fetched. Inside the house, the supposed burglary didn't make sense either. A gold chain and cash were left untouched on a table. If thieves had broken in, why leave valuables behind? Justice Lyons later told the court that by the jury's verdict, it was clear they had rejected the intruder narrative entirely. "You maintained that ruse in your 000 call," she told Simona during sentencing. "You then falsely caused a disturbance in the house to make it look as though there were intruders." The prosecution's case was that the crime scene had been staged, a calculated attempt to shift blame away from the real killer. The trial revealed more unsettling details. Simona, a university student at the time, was said to have stood to benefit financially if her mother died. Prosecutors described the killing as brutal and not a spur-of-the-moment decision, but the defense pushed back hard. Defense barrister Anthony Glynn QC argued there was no motive. He suggested the prosecution had failed to prove why Simona would commit such a crime. He floated an alternative theory that the killing could have been a vengeance attack connected to something that occurred in Macedonia. In the month Radika was killed, Simona had made inquiries with travel agencies about booking a flight there. She told staff she was planning to move. The defense also pointed to what they said were investigative gaps. Hair was found clutched in Radika's hand, but it was never sent for DNA testing. That, they argued, was significant. Simona's clothing had been checked. There was no blood found on her, not on her clothes, not under her fingernails. Sinks, drains, and bins were inspected. No bloody clothing was recovered. No visible attempt to clean up was discovered. Prosecutors suggested she could have removed her clothes and washed herself, disposing of evidence before police arrived. But the defense countered that investigators had found no proof of that. Still, after hearing all the evidence, a Supreme Court jury deliberated for just 1 day before reaching a unanimous verdict: guilty of murder. Justice Anne Lyons spoke about Radhika not just as a victim, but as a person, and the violence inflicted on her was described as devastating. Her life ended in her own bed. Simona Zafirovska was sentenced to life in prison. Under Queensland law, she must serve a mandatory 20 years before being eligible to apply for parole. As she stood in court, she shook her head when asked if she had anything to say. There was another revelation during proceedings, one that added a strange layer to an already tragic case. It emerged that Simona had been adopted. She did not learn that fact until after her mother's death, when DNA tests were conducted as part of the investigation. The courtroom absorbed that detail quietly. It did not change the verdict. Outside, police vehicles lined the street in the gap where Radhika's life ended. Inside the home, prosecutors said the synthetic timber plank used as a weapon had been hidden in Simona's bedroom, a silent piece of evidence contradicting the intruder's story. In her summing up, Justice Lyons told the jury the prosecution alleged the scene was contrived. The 000 call was performance, and the intruders never existed. By their verdict, the jury agreed. Now, Simona's solicitor, Neil Lawler, has confirmed an appeal has been lodged. The case may continue in higher courts, but one fact remains unshaken. A 54-year-old mother was killed in her own home. A daughter claimed strangers did it, and a jury concluded she was responsible.
Third offender. It was just days before Christmas in 2017 when a quiet suburban home in Chapel Hill, Brisbane, became the scene of a tragedy no one saw coming. At around 8 p.m, Jared Castell walked through his front door after work. It had been a long day. He was 2 hours later than his wife, Katie Ann Castell, had expected. What should have been an ordinary evening quickly spiraled into something fatal. Katie Castell, 38 at the time, began arguing with her husband almost immediately. Prosecutors later told the Supreme Court in Brisbane that she was angry and annoyed that he hadn't arrived home earlier. What began as frustration escalated into violence in a matter of moments. First, she threw a laptop at him, then a large kitchen knife. She scratched her own wrists with the blade before throwing it at her husband. The prosecution described what happened next in chilling terms. The knife struck Jared, who was shirtless at the time, directly in the chest. It pierced his heart. The depth of the wound was at least 4 centimeters, prosecutor Judith Geary told the court. It was a single throw, a single act, but the consequences were catastrophic. Jared collapsed. Katie reportedly rushed to grab a towel, trying to stem the bleeding. She called 000. Emergency services arrived and attempted medical treatment at the house before rushing him to hospital. He died a short time later. Inside that same house, their 4-year-old son was present. In court, the legal story shifted. Prosecutors ultimately conceded they could not prove Katie intended to kill her husband. Instead, she pleaded guilty to the domestic violence offence of manslaughter. On Tuesday in the Supreme Court in Brisbane, she was sentenced to 9 years in prison. The Crown's case was clear. This was an unprovoked and unexpected attack. Jared was not behaving in a threatening manner. He had simply come home late from work. She grabbed the weapon in circumstances where she was angry and annoyed, Ms. Geary said. The prosecution described her actions as inexplicable and disproportionate. A moment of fury had ended a life. In a victim impact statement read to the court, Jared's father, Anthony Castell, described the relentless stress his son's killing had placed on their family. Outside the courtroom, Anthony spoke about his son with a father's tenderness. From today, we can actually go forward after losing him. We can start grieving, he said. But he also acknowledged that the pain doesn't simply disappear. There is now a grandson to protect, a child who lost his father inside his own home. Jared's brother, Ryan Castell, described him as supportive, giving, generous. That's been lost from the whole of the world, he said. During the trial, Jared's siblings painted a troubling picture of the marriage. They told the court that Katie had been psychologically abusing him. They claimed she tried to alienate him from close friends and family. The defense acknowledged the act but framed it differently. Barrister Greg Maguire told the court his client had shown extraordinary remorse. He described her as frantic at the crime scene. He called it a stupid, dangerous act in a heated, silly argument. But when Justice Jean Dalton examined the remorse more closely, she found it complicated. From custody, Katie had written a 12-page letter to Jared's family. The first 2 pages expressed sorrow, but the remaining pages, the judge noted, focused on her own circumstances in jail and the watch house. Justice Dalton described the letter as peculiar. It led her to question whether Katie fully understood the gravity of what she had done. It was extraordinary violence out of all proportion, the judge said during sentencing. Jared was in his own home, a place where he should have felt safe. Instead, an argument about arriving home late escalated into lethal violence. The court was told Katie would not receive a recommendation regarding parole. She must serve her sentence as determined under Queensland law, with no special guidance from the judge about early release. 9 years, for a life taken in seconds. In the end, the court concluded that while there was not enough evidence to prove intent to kill, there was no doubt that Katie Ann Castell was responsible for her husband's death.
4th offender. In December 2015, in the quiet suburb of Capalaba, Queensland, a confrontation unfolded that would end in bloodshed, a roadside discovery, and a courtroom reckoning years later. Roxanne Ecker-Peters was 32 years old at the time, a pharmacist's assistant and a mother. According to court proceedings later reported by multiple news outlets, she had already endured a sexual assault by 51-year-old Grant Jason Cassar just days earlier. But on December 4th, 2015, the situation escalated. Cassar came to her home. Reports state that Cassar threatened Peters she must have sex with him again, or he would harm her 9-year-old daughter. Instead of complying, Peters went to her kitchen, picked up a knife. According to 9 News and other reports, she confronted Cassar and began stabbing him repeatedly. During the attack, she reportedly shouted, "You don't rape me." The violence was intense. Cassar sustained 61 injuries. Some of the chest wounds were nearly 4 inches deep. He was stabbed in multiple areas, including the chest and groin. The assault did not end quickly. After the stabbing, Peters tied a rope around Cassar's neck and body. She attached him to her car and dragged him for approximately 6/10 of a mile. His body was later dumped in a roadside ditch. It was discovered the next day. The brutality of the disposal shocked investigators. Years later, in Brisbane Supreme Court, Peters pleaded guilty to manslaughter and interfering with the corpse. The original charge had been more serious, but the plea acknowledged that while she caused Cassar's death, the circumstances did not amount to murder under the law. She was sentenced to 10.5 years in prison. Under the terms outlined in court, she would be eligible for parole in 2020. Justice David Bodis presided over the sentencing. He did not ignore the severity of what happened after the killing. He described her actions in disposing of the body as callous. He noted that she did not seek help or contact authorities after the stabbing, but he also addressed the context. "I accept the stabbing occurred in circumstances when you were enraged by what the deceased had done to you and was threatening to do to you again," he said. The judge described the situation as involving significant provocation. The courtroom also heard about Peter's background. Justice Bodis referenced her childhood, which reportedly involved exposure to drug use and her own experiences as a young victim of sexual abuse. "No doubt," he said, "your rage continued to affect your attitude to him." The defense argued that these past traumas shaped her response to Cassar's threat. The prosecution, while acknowledging the provocation, emphasized the extent of the violence and the disturbing manner in which the body was handled. Cassar's family addressed the court as well. His mother spoke of grief that time cannot heal. "Never in the world could I imagine a woman would do such a horrible thing," she said. "Whoever wrote the words, 'Wounds heal with time,' obviously never lost a child." Her words reflected a different side of the tragedy. The loss experienced by a family who, regardless of the circumstances surrounding his death, had lost a son. The case presents a complicated and deeply emotional narrative. On one side, a woman who reported being sexually assaulted and then threatened with harm to her daughter. On the other, a man who died violently and a family left to mourn him. The court had to navigate those layers carefully. The judge recognized the rage and fear that fueled the stabbing, but he also emphasized that the law does not permit individuals to take justice into their own hands, even in the face of serious wrongdoing. The disposal of the body, dragging it behind a vehicle and abandoning it in a ditch, was cited as particularly troubling. In sentencing Peters to 10.5 years, the court sought to balance accountability with context. She was 35 years old at the time of sentencing, 3 years after the killing. Neither prosecutors nor her attorney provided additional public comment following the sentencing, according to reports. What remains is a case that continues to provoke debate. It raises questions about self-defense, about provocation, about trauma and its long shadow. The events of December 4th, 2015, unfolded in minutes, but their consequences stretched across years. In the end, the judge's words captured the tension at the heart of the case. Rage, provocation, and responsibility intersected in a way that left no one untouched. A life was taken, a mother went to prison, and a community was left grappling with a story that defies simple answers. Fifth offender. On Thursday morning, inside the Brisbane Supreme Court, a 51-year-old mother stood surrounded by friends and family, waiting to hear how the next chapter of her life would unfold. Christine Eleanor Robig was once known not for crime, but for compassion. Back in 2007, nearly a decade before her life would unravel, she founded a charity to raise awareness and funds for ataxia telangiectasia, a rare and devastating genetic disease. She had launched it after 2 of her children were diagnosed with the condition. As a mother of 3, her advocacy was deeply personal. She campaigned, fundraised, and built a public identity rooted in care and resilience. But by 2016, something shifted. According to the court, Miss Robig's own drug use began to escalate. What started as personal use spiraled into something else. By 2019, police would describe her not as a struggling user, but as a reliable supplier of methamphetamine, commonly known as ice. In May 2019, she was arrested. A search of her phone revealed messages that would trigger a deeper investigation into her activities. Those digital traces led police to raid her Bald Hills home in November 2019. Crown Prosecutor Ron Swanick told the court that between September 5th and November 18th, 2019, Ms. Robig discussed supplying methamphetamine on 57 separate occasions. The quantities ranged from 0.1 grams to 1.75 grams. During that 10-week period, she actually supplied the drug at least 10 times. This was not sporadic dealing, it was structured, consistent and negotiated. The court heard she sold 1.75 grams of ice for $350. Bank records showed that approximately $3,000 in cash had been deposited into her account during September and October of that year. But the transactions didn't always involve cash. Mr. Swanick told the court that Mrs. Robig was willing to accept goods in place of money, handbags, sunglasses, and other items, even if they were stolen. She was also found to have supplied drugs on 4 earlier occasions in 2019, before her initial arrest in May. By the time she stood in court, she had pleaded guilty to 11 drug-related offences, including trafficking, supply, possession, and receiving tainted property. The image presented by the prosecution was clear. This was a woman embedded in a drug supply network. But the defense urged the court to look beyond the charges. Barrister Scott Lynch told the judge that Ms. Robig's 2 disabled children, now 18 and 17, still relied heavily on her support, even though they did not currently reside with her. He also warned that if she was sentenced to custody, she risked losing her home, a property specially fitted with wheelchair accessibility. The house had been modified to accommodate her children's disabilities. Losing it would not just be a financial blow, but a practical one. Mr. Lynch argued that when police raided her home, they found no evidence of any glamour or opulence. There were no luxury cars, no lavish renovations, no extravagant lifestyle funded by drug profits. He said his client had significantly reduced her drug use since her arrest and was willing to undergo drug testing if granted immediate parole. But Justice David Jackson had to weigh more than hardship. In sentencing Ms. Robig to 3 years and 6 months in jail, the judge acknowledged the complexity of her circumstances, but also the seriousness of the offending. He made a notable decision regarding parole. Under typical sentencing principles, offenders are often required to serve 1/3 of their sentence before becoming eligible for parole. In Ms. Robig's case, Justice Jackson opted to allow parole eligibility earlier than that benchmark. She will be eligible for parole on December 1st, 2023. I am doing that specifically because of the antecedents and because of the factor of the ongoing needs your 2 disabled children have of your support, Justice Jackson said. But he also made his reasoning clear. Her likelihood of reoffending, if not sentenced to time in custody, was too high. In other words, despite her background, despite her family responsibilities, the court determined that imprisonment was necessary. As she left court, Ms. Robig faced the reality that she would spend the next period of her life behind bars. For her family, particularly her children, the consequences extend beyond the courtroom. The home's future is uncertain. Financial pressures loom. Support systems will be tested. 3 years and 6 months. Parole eligibility set earlier than usual. A judge's recognition of family needs, but also of risk. Sixth offender, Brianna Christine Ioannidis, once a rising criminal lawyer on the Gold Coast, stood before Justice Deborah Mullins, not as counsel, but as a convicted drug trafficker. At 30 years old, her transformation from promising solicitor to inmate was laid bare in chilling detail. And according to the court, her descent could be traced back to a single turning point. She ended a long-term relationship. Then she met a new man. He became her boyfriend and eventually her co-offender. Before 2015, Ioannidis was building a career in criminal law. She understood the justice system. She knew the penalties for trafficking. She had likely stood beside clients facing sentences for the very offences she would later commit. "You were a successful solicitor practicing in criminal law," Justice Mullins told her. "I'm sure that prior to 2015, you didn't envisage standing in the dock yourself and being sentenced." But from late 2015 onward, her life veered sharply off course. Over a 2-year period, Ioannidis became deeply involved in the drug trade, not just at street level, but wholesale. The charges stacked up. Around 40 offences in total: trafficking, selling, possessing, methamphetamine, heroin, MDMA, GHB, steroids. There were also property offences, weapons offences. Justice Mullins described her as a young person with a promising career who became addicted to drugs, someone who allowed her life, basically, to get out of control. The first major crack in her professional life came in November 2015. Police raided the home she shared with her boyfriend. Inside, they found commercial quantities of ice, heroin, and steroids. There was 1.756 kilograms of butanediol, a chemical precursor often linked to GHB production. They also found a shotgun. For a criminal lawyer, this was more than reckless. It was self-destruction. She was granted bail, but the warning wasn't enough. In December 2015, police raided the property again. This time, they discovered materials used to package steroids along with more drugs. Still, the offending continued. By early 2017, Ioannidis and her partner were caught trafficking 442 grams of ice and 53 litres of GHB. These were not minor quantities. This was supply on a significant scale. The court heard that when it came to collecting debts from customers, Ioannidis would approach it in a friendly manner. She would request payment calmly, professionally. But if payment wasn't forthcoming, her boyfriend would escalate, issuing threats. It was a partnership with defined roles. When her boyfriend was eventually remanded in custody, her offending slowed, but it did not stop. Even without him physically present, she continued operating. At one point, she supplied $2,000 worth of cocaine to a man. She also advised others on how to set up their own drug enterprises. She wasn't just dealing, she was mentoring. The courtroom narrative painted a picture of someone who understood systems, someone intelligent, someone capable. But addiction blurred the line between knowledge and action. Justice Mullins described her as a joint principal in the drug business, not a bystander, not a subordinate. She was a leader alongside her partner. Yet the judge also acknowledged a crucial shift. The relationship had ended. That break, the court suggested, might offer a pathway forward. The fact that you've broken up means you should be able to go forward without his adverse influence on you, Justice Mullins said. The sentence was 8 years in prison. For someone who once defended others from similar outcomes, the irony was sharp. But the judge's words carried something unexpected, a note of cautious optimism. If you are able to control your addiction when you're released from custody, you're intelligent, you're still young, and you have a potential to benefit yourself and others from another career, she said. I also consider you have more promise than most for getting back on the straight and narrow. It was not leniency. It was recognition of potential still there, buried beneath poor decisions and addiction. The story of Brianna Ioannidis is not just about crime. It's about proximity to the law and how knowing it does not make someone immune to breaking it. She understood sentencing frameworks. She understood trafficking thresholds. She likely advised clients on mitigation and rehabilitation. And yet, addiction reshaped her judgment. The home raids, the commercial quantities, the shotgun, the repeated bail, the escalation, the mentoring of other dealers. All of it unfolded while she was trained in the very system designed to stop it. Now, the courtroom she once worked within has sentenced her. 8 years, a career halted, a reputation dismantled. But also, according to the judge, there is a possibility of rebuilding. Because beyond the charges, beyond the headlines, Justice Mullins saw something else. Intelligence, youth, promise not entirely extinguished.